Hey everyone, Shane Schlesman, pastor, West End Assembly of God. I've been sharing some perspective conversations on our YouTube channel over the last few months and getting some different conversations going. And I'm excited for all of you to join us today. If you haven't watched any of those perspective videos, there's lots of great conversations on there about what's going on in our world and really a kingdom perspective of those aspects of our world. So today I'm excited to be able to talk about a really important issue regarding perspectives on police and race. So with me today is Rush Middleton, Henrico County detective, police officer for 18 years, a husband and father of 5. So I know you're busy over there, Rush. Thank you for joining us. And William Sutton, Henrico County resident and community change agent. You've just been involved in the community. You're also a husband and father of 2 children. So I know you're busy as well. And thank you guys both for being with us. Rush, I appreciate your service to Henrico County in all these years, 18 years. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Rush.
Yeah. So thank you, Shane. Thank you, William, for having this conversation. Yeah, I've been married for almost 20 years to my wife. Grew up in a police family. So my father was a police officer and grew up in Hanover County and have been attending WEAG my entire life. So that's kind of like my story of where I came from. And yeah, we have 5 awesome kids. My oldest is 16 and they range down to almost 2 years old right now. So they're all currently in the house and I make no promises that none of them are going to show up at some point. So yeah, so it's a busy house.
That'll make this a whole nother perspectives conversation.
That's right. But it's a busy house, but it's a lot of fun. And yeah, but just so that's kind of the story. My wife and I have, like I said, been married for almost 20 years, and we're just raising these kids the best we can. And that's a little bit about me.
That's awesome. William, thank you also for joining us. William Sutton lives in Henrico County as well. And tell us a little bit about yourself and
yes, sir.
What's going on here? Are we going to be interrupted at your house too?
We are not. My wife thankfully took my daughter out to lunch, and I just have to worry about Carter. Carter's a pretty cool dude. I don't think he's going to come and disturb us, though. He's upstairs playing Roblox or something.
Oh, good. He's a creative young lad.
Yes. So
how long have you been married, and how old are your kids?
I've been married now for 16 glorious years. I got one daughter who's 11, going on 21, and my son he just turned 8. So 2 kids, a wonderful wife of 16 years. Been a part of the WEAG family for about the last 3.5 to 4 years, and yeah, been a resident of Henrico for about 5 or 6 years, and that's me.
I'm so excited to have both of you in this conversation with me. Thank you both for joining me, for lending your perspective. And, as 2 fellow church members, we've been doing life together as church family. We've been doing life together as followers of Christ, and I'm excited to just learn a little bit about both your perspectives today. Rush, tell us a little bit about what made you become an officer and your experience on the police force.
Sure. So like I mentioned before, I grew up in a police home. So my father was a Henrico police officer for 45 plus years. So my entire growing up and childhood experience, I was around police work. And so it was something that was familiar to me. And by the time I went away to college, I was 100% sure that's not what I was going to do with my life. I was going to go make some money, right? And so I went to business school and got a business degree and worked for a couple of years in the private sector. And then I was at work on September 11th, 2001, when the whole world changed in a matter of a few moments. And I just had this overwhelming sense as I was watching all of this unfold in my office that I was in the wrong place, and that I wanted to be in New York. I wanted to be at the Pentagon or in Pennsylvania, and doing something to help. And so I knew at that point, like, okay, well, I guess it must be in my blood or something, because here I was going to uproot this whole plan that I had. And the toughest part of that was obviously the conversation with my wife, where I had to tell her, like, hey, I'm thinking that maybe I might want to go be a police officer. So that's what kind of led me to that. And I was actually, my first day on the job was September 11th, 2002. So a year to the day was my first day with the police department. Yeah. Wow. So that kind of was like the frame that brought me in. I mean, obviously I had the experience of growing up around it, but it was really more about like, look at how can I do something that's really a proactive way to engage my community and hopefully make a difference in some people's lives.
Yeah, and I skipped a part there too. Just tell us. I'm gonna ask William this too. Where do you come from? You said you grew up in a police family. Where'd you grow up? I know you've been at WEAG for since birth, I think.
Right, pretty much. So I grew up in Hanover County, and my father was he worked for Henrico County Police Department. So I've been in the Richmond area for all my 42 years.
William, tell us a little bit about where you come from. Where did you grow up? And
so I was born and raised, born in Verona, but raised in Chesterfield. I probably moved out of Chesterfield around probably about third grade. So I'm a product of Middleton. I graduated from Middleton a few years back, and moved out to Chesterfield. We lived in Chesterfield for about 4 years after we got married, kind of settling in out there. And then a few years ago, we just transferred over to Henrico, and we've started raising our family here, and it's a great place to live and work, and we really enjoy it. I don't have a super rich family history with the police force like Mr. Rush over there.
Yeah, well, that's
my parents. My mom was a teacher.
Tell us about that.
My mom was a teacher, and my dad was self-employed. He had his own business, and as a contractor, one of the things that I realized was that was not something I was going to do. I wasn't built for that. I wasn't built for that working outside all day, every day type life. So it gave me an appreciation. My dad gave me appreciation for hard work and determination. My mom gave me the spirit of caring for others. That's kind of translated into what it is that I do today, which is assisting individuals with disabilities gain employment. So I've always had a passion for serving. Always had a passion for helping others in whatever way. Sometimes I have a tendency to stray towards those that don't necessarily have the voice. So, yeah.
Well, William, I've got Rush, police family, you growing up in a working family of a whole different sort, but both of you also grew up different culturally. And the unfortunate truth of this world is that you had a completely different experience with the police, perhaps in a completely different perspective. So tell me a little bit about what is your perspective and what's your experience with the police both now, and what was it like growing up and earlier as a young man?
Well, growing up in the area that I grew up in, I will say that it wasn't like I had daily encounters with the police. We grew up in a middle class, working class family. Growing up, I was always taught to, respect authority. The police were there to help. They were there to assist. They were there to serve the community. So I always had a healthy respect for officers, for the most part. I will say that there were a couple of instances, and I think that's kind of where the one of the questions that you wanted us to kind of touch on now, where I had a not so good experience with the police officers because of fitting a description. I found myself being targeted or profiled based on the way that I looked and where I was in a particular situation, that at the end of the day, once they were able to do their investigation, it was unfounded. And for a lot of time, I struggled with trusting the police because I had never found myself in that situation. You know, you hear stories about people that say that they fit the description, but it had never hit me. But to find myself in that situation where I was profiled based on the way that I looked, it kind of stung and it hurt for a little while. And the 16 to 18-year-old me was a much different person than who I am today, in terms of how I view the police. It took me a little while to get over that situation. I mean, I don't know if you've ever found yourself in a situation where somebody looked at you and judged you, and while they were doing their job, but
I'm a pastor. Nobody judges me. Nobody judges me.
Found myself in a situation where there's someone there that's supposed to protect and serve, and be there for you, and to just look at you and judge you, and it was just tough. And
wow, that's a level of scrutiny that many people have not ever experienced, or a level of judgment from people that you should trust.
Yeah. And I think the thing that kind of stung the most is, even after that particular encounter, like when all was said and done, there was no apology. There was no, we got the wrong one. It was nothing. It was just like, oh, business as usual. Got the wrong one. Well, let's go find the individual we're looking for. It was disheartening. But as I've grown and as I've matured, it's kind of been a journey for me, because there are so many awesome officers that are out there. Like, oftentimes you got one or two that will make poor decisions, and then the whole entire force or the whole entire group is judged based on those particular actions. Whether that's right or wrong, it's just the fact of the matter. I mean, you judge by the company you keep. And officers, I mean, they have so many different things that they come up against, so many different variables that are, it's tough all the way around. Like I said, I kind of alluded to the fact that the 16-year-old me versus the 42-year-old me, I've kind of grown and evolved in terms of how I view the police. Earlier, when I was younger, I was angry, but now, I gotta be able to maintain and keep my cool when it comes to how you respond and react. Because, I mean, while that anger sometimes is founded, sometimes you gotta find a different way to channel it. And I find that I'm channeling it now by getting involved in organizations that support not only community, but the police. A perfect example of that would be work that I'm doing now with the Henrico Police Athletic League, connecting youth and police officers so that you see them in a positive light. Because I think that if you're able to change the trajectory of how kids view them, you can change the trajectory of the future.
Wow. What a journey that you've been on. I can't imagine emotionally how I would react and how angry I would be. And then as a follower of Jesus, to say, I want to bring about transformation. You're doing that in Henrico, you're doing that in the Brooklyn community. where you live, and I know you've been involved with county manager there, and you've been involved in police reform, but not everyone has that reaction. But when someone's shot rather than apprehended, whether that ends their life or doesn't, or even just violently apprehended or subdued, and especially when it happens to a Black man who represents a people group who are discriminated against both today and deep in our history, there's an unheard voice that really cries out for generations, I think, of the Black community who've been unjustly treated. And it gets focused on the police because the police are the tip of the spear, right? Of introducing justice in situations and sometimes in unjust ways. So how do you kind of reconcile those two things in your mind? You know, you have the police force on one hand, and you understand their situations better than we do. And then you have, you know, really all communities that are impacting and reacting. They're just reacting to what they're watching unfold before them. They're not police. I'm not a police officer. I'm watching somebody get shot 7 times.
Yep.
How do you weigh those in your heart and your mind?
Yeah. I mean, it's incredibly, obviously this entire conversation and the topic and police response and tactics and all, it's a very complex and difficult thing to even kind of like crack open and figure out, like, how do we keep this in balance? How do we protect the community in a fair and equitable way? How do we protect the police officers that are working? And how do we instill trust in the communities that we're supposed to be serving? And it's not an easy job. I told you earlier, Shane, I mean, I think policing in America is like one of the most difficult jobs to do well, but it's one of the easiest jobs to do poorly. So if you go into a community and you aren't taking your responsibility seriously, or you aren't taking your profession seriously, it's really easy to go down a path where you make mistakes that really can adversely impact humans' lives. I mean, we have like I think you mentioned is the tip of the spear. I mean, police officers really are the most visible form of government that exists, that people have interactions with. I mean, people aren't daily interacting with their legislators or the government officials, but people are interacting with police officers daily. And so we have a really, a huge responsibility to be good stewards of that authority and that power, to be good representatives of the government as somebody who's there to protect and serve, knowing that there are times where very, very complex situations happen very quickly, and police officers make decisions literally in nanoseconds that unfold that are life and death. And, but the question for me, and what I see a lot, is when people see a situation like with Mr. Blake, people will look at that situation and they'll look for little parts of it that help validate whatever their preconceived belief was going in. So you'll see a lot of pro law enforcement folks saying, well, he was doing this, or did you know about his criminal history? And what I try to keep in balance as a police officer is, there may be other extenuating circumstances that come out, and maybe we will learn more. And maybe he did have a criminal history, but as a Christian, as someone who aims to serve his community, that's not the most critical thing. The most critical thing is that no matter what Mr. Blake's past was, he was made in the image of God. His life has value. His life matters. That doesn't mean that every police shooting is wrong, and that every police officer who ever involved in enforcement action should be reprimanded. But I do think, like, for me personally, what I've really learned and tried to do is really slow down on going to like the far extreme of like, okay, well, all police officers do the right thing all the time. It's just not true. It's not true in any profession. And so trying to figure out how to balance that of like looking at every person that I interact with, that's a human being. And even if that person has committed a heinous crime, it's still someone that God loves. and that I need to reflect that on. And it's a challenging balancing act. But we have a tendency to just remove the humanity of people that we've had negative experiences with or that are different than us. And I think that's really the root of a lot of these problems, is that we're not looking at each other in the way that we should. And again, it's really hard to dissect every single incident that has occurred in America even over in the past, just in the past, this year. Some of the things that we've seen on video, it's troubling, and I grieve. I grieve for my Black brothers and sisters who are hurting. I grieve for my profession because of the additional angst that exists in law enforcement and in the community as a whole. So I mean, we're hurting, and my hope is that by having more conversations, more dialogues, by working with each other more, and really coming to grips with the history too. And I think that's what I've really, like, just personally for me, really trying to take time to talk to people of color, to read, to learn, to be more aware. Because growing up in a white family, in a law enforcement family, like, I mean, the truth is, it wasn't that anybody in my family was ever instilling racism in me or hiding things from me. But we have to admit where we are, where we came from, and that this is a long journey, and we've made a lot of mistakes along the way as police, as Christians. We haven't done what we should be doing all the time, and so I hope this also kind of helps me keep that in balance.
Yeah,
Hey, Bruce,
that's
you just
good.
hit something that's key, man. And I think that's part of the challenge that folks have, is people aren't willing to acknowledge that historical piece of it. And it's just like, oh, it didn't happen, or get over it, or whatever. Right. But when you continue to see these instances where, you see an interaction with the police and then there doesn't seem to be any recourse, it hurts, man. Every single time that I see one of these videos where somebody's dying, it's just like, oh my God, like, here we are, we're here again. But then on the other side, to your point about the acknowledgement of the historical piece of it, like, there's people out here now that are like that was then, like, but you can't, like, if you don't address that trauma that people are going through over and over and over again. I saw a statistic, I think it says something to the effect of, like, it takes somebody like 96 hours for every single instance of like abuse that they see on TV with regards to, like, some of these recent events. Mm-hmm. That's a long time, man. 96 hours, if that is the key. So Jacob Blake, it would take somebody 96 hours to get over that. Then you got Mr. Floyd. That, just think about that, just from a humanity standpoint, to just continue. It's tough, man.
Yep.
William, now I know you have a lot of maturity in walking with the Lord and being a follower of Christ. But it's as difficult as it is for you. You can understand, I'm sure, how a violent reaction occurs, like what you just said. I mean, we can understand it. We can have empathy. How do you keep yourself, the people around you, the people you're responsible for, how do you speak into that while having empathy towards understanding why it's happening, but still standing against that it's happening? I'm talking about wrongful violent reactions from certain people. And I know, listen, we all know the realities, right? Some of these people are being bussed in and we had in our own city, right? People who aren't even from Richmond coming in and causing problems. And I'm not talking about all of the people, Antifa and those things. I'm just talking about anger that ends up being you get swept into a moment that maybe you never wanted to be in, but now you find yourself in, and these are people who are burning a gas station down or cheering for a police officer being hurt, or that kind of visceral reaction that's understandable. How do you have empathy and understand it and yet stand against it?
I mean, it's simple, but it's not simple. It's like, what would Christ do? Like, that's not something that you can condone. Like, you can't sit by idle and celebrate those types of things. That's not okay. As a dad, I can't teach my kids that it's okay to react in such a way. Like, if you're having a disagreement with someone, use your words. Kind of like what Rush alluded to a couple of moments ago, we have to be able to lean into these types of conversations, to be able to have that dialogue, to be able to understand where this person may be coming from. You're upset. Okay, I understand that. But what do we do to move forward? Like, what do we do in the terms of systemic change? Like, what do we do in terms of reform to make sure that if these things were to occur in the future, how do we prevent them? Or what do we do from a reform standpoint to make sure that it doesn't happen again, or that we eliminate or mitigate them? It's unacceptable. I mean, you can't go around using your anger to burn down things. But that goes back to what I was saying earlier about people that don't feel like their voice is being heard. They feel like this is the only way for someone to get some attention. Now you're listening to me when I've been saying it. People have been raising their hand. Hey, look, this has been going on. This has been going on. But over and over and over again, you can understand how, but it's not necessarily the best way, but it's a way for someone to hear you.
And then the confusion of the shootings, Rush, about this, what would you say to people who kind of use that perspective? As a police officer, you've, I'm sure, felt attacked. All of your police brothers and sisters, okay? Your police force, your friends, the people you work with, they've all been attacked. They've all been under attack in some ways, but out of reaction to something that's happened very bad. And what do you say to people who are like, oh, this is just the media creating this? Like, for instance, they didn't cover a mass shooting in DC. They didn't put that on there. What I thought, now it's only when the police do it.
Right.
What is it? What's your perspective on that? And give us some.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier. People are always looking for a tidbit of something, or a little a nugget of truth that they can help validate whatever their position is on the issue. So if they're looking for ways to minimize what Black folks, people of color, are saying about their experience, they can say, well, look what happened in Chicago. That's something I hear all the time. Nobody cares about all the people that were killed in Chicago this weekend. And you could argue that the media certainly gives more attention to certain events than others. But just, as a police officer, these police shootings are a little bit different than just a regular shooting in a suburb in Chicago, because there's a sense of responsibility and authority and protection that we're supposed to provide to the community. So when you see someone who's an authority figure, someone who has been given that authority by the government to come in and protect and serve, and they use lethal force, there's a higher level of attention, as it should be. I mean, that responsibility shouldn't just be given with no sense of there needing to be high levels of accountability and responsibility. But yeah, I mean, it's a very, I'd say it's a very stressful time in law enforcement, because of the fact that when these images that we've seen, these videos we've seen, and the heightened awareness that's been raised to what many Black folks in this country have experienced, and as they express themselves, one of the natural ways that comes out is there's a lot of anti-police messaging, and certainly I think that's had an impact on my coworkers. I'm very thankful for my relationship with Jesus, and thankful for my family and my church and the support that I have, because that's helped me kind of, I'm able to filter a lot of things through. So I see things I see a banner that says all police are murderers. Well, I know that's not written generally they're not actually making a statistical statement that 100% of police officers are committing murder. That's someone who is expressing themselves from a deep place of hurt and anger, resentment, sense of injustice. And so you see that expressed. So a lot of times we tend to take this stuff personally. And as a police officer, the last thing that I can do is go into a situation and have whatever someone says to me or however someone treats me, take that really personally. Because really most of the time it really has nothing to do with rush. You know what I mean? It has to do with history, with experience, with pain. And we have to be able to acknowledge that, and not just, and not paint each other with these broad brushes, but understand where that's coming from and understand why the community is hurting. I mean, there's still, I'll tell you, Shane, there is still a lot of support for law enforcement. So you do see some loud voices and you see a lot of things and you see the narrative of defund the police and stuff. You hear that, but I'll tell you, there are a lot of very supportive people. As a matter of fact, I would say the vast majority of people that I interact with or that I have interactions with on a daily basis or are very positive in general about the police. But that doesn't mean being positive and pro-police doesn't mean that we're against the Black community's experience, or that we're saying that I'm pro-police, so therefore I'm in this category, which means that means there can't be any reform. You know what I mean? Yeah. That's crazy talk. We've got to find this balance of no, of course not all police officers are committing murder, right? Yeah. And of course, but there is a problem. And the problem may not be, we get into we nitpick these situations. Well, he did this, or the officer, he did the right thing here. Legally, he was protected. But when we get into these little details, we're missing the larger point here and the larger issue that exists in the context of our culture, where there's clearly a problem that exists, and we've got to work together to make positive changes so I think William was saying, I mean, we're never going to eliminate police officers taking people into custody. We're probably never going to completely eliminate police officers drawing their weapons and having to use them, right? But we want to mitigate, we want to minimize the interactions that people are having where it leads to that. And there's no easy answer for that. There's not hey, well, we just go with the Republican platform or the Democrat platform and all our problems are solved. It's way more deep than that. And truthfully, like I said, I mean, honestly, it's relationship with Jesus and being grounded in that helps me as a police officer not get jaded. I think a lot of that anger that William was talking about, what often will happen is people who've had really negative experience with police, they get angry, rightfully so, right? Mm-hmm. And then police officers have experiences with someone who's angry at police, right? Yep. And then that police officer now has a negative experience with the person who has a negative attitude. And so here we do this, boom, and we're just banging against each other saying this is why I act the way I do. And then the person who feels like they've been treated poorly is well, this is why I act the way I do. And we end up butting heads. Yeah. Instead
that's
of
good.
having conversation. Yeah. And so it's like we're experiencing, it's like to not go back into too deep into the whole trauma side. It's like two different people who've experienced different types of trauma. And we're not solving anything. We're just yelling at each other.
Wow. William, you've managed to somehow bridge this. I mean, you're getting involved in police reform and having these conversations. I know what the catalyst was for that, but how did you bring yourself to say, hey, I'm going to get involved. This is going to be my march, so to speak. How did that happen for you?
I think, Shane, man, I think it started for me when Trayvon Martin died, and I just thought about it from the perspective as a dad, and he had just as much right to that space as anybody, but his life was taken, and all I could see was that could be my son possibly, man. it's like it's gotta be a better way to do things, and not to politicize anything or whatever, but that's what um, Colin Kaepernick was talking about when he was kneeling. Like, we got to do something about this so that we don't have to keep losing these young black boys. And in that instance, that wasn't even law enforcement. He was, I was like, I don't even know what you would call it, but I was like, I gotta do something so that at least I'm making a small ripple in a big pond. It's not going to be something that's going to happen overnight, but by continuing to having these conversations, by continuing to talk to the individuals that are making decisions with regards to how police are trained, because some of it comes down to training, man. Like, if you got one road cop that wasn't paying attention when he was in the academy, and you take somebody's life, like, get out of here, because like that's like that person can't. There's no coming back from death. Like, that's done. Like, and it can't be, well, oh well. It's just. So yeah, I feel like probably got my marching orders when that incident occurred, and I just was like, I got to do something more than just sitting around being angry or sitting around talking to my friends, because when you sit around and you talk to folks that think like you or just do what you do, you don't get that outside perspective. That's where you start having change, when you start bringing diverse perspectives, diverse experiences, diverse platforms, because that's what it's about.
Yeah.
Like, being able to use
Yeah.
your platform, whatever your platform is, to instill some type of change. So,
Wow. Thank you for sharing that, William. And, this conversation, it's enlightening. Regardless of what your opinion of the Trayvon Martin case, or regardless of your opinion of Colin Kaepernick, and as some people may think he's un-American because of what he did, or some people may think that he stepped outside to make a difference. And no matter what it is, it doesn't really matter what my perspective. What matters is understanding your perspective of that. And to hear you say, this was a catalyst for me to be a change agent in my world, to make a difference, to really live out the kingdom principles that I am now growing in me, and now living that out. I like hearing your like, William, you and I have talked about your meetings in Brooklyn. You're going to community meetings. You're emailing back and forth with the leaders in your community. You're involved in your Rotary Club, and you're bringing county manager to speak to your Rotary Club. You're getting involved in the community in sports efforts, and changing the perspective of young Black men and women of the police at the very, very beginning, where it starts. And those are things that I'm saddened by, the fact that if I disagreed on one statement you said, that I can't hear the rest of your perspective. That's the kind of culture we live in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Rush, you live in this in a policing world, but you live in it in a church world, in a family, and in a community that you live in. I live in that as a pastor, as a father, as a husband, and I'm saddened by it. And I just am encouraged today to hear two men of God speak about their perspective, and how they're living this out. Rush, let me ask you, not as a police officer, but as a follower of Jesus, what has God been teaching you as a white follower of Jesus about racism right now?
Oh man, I tell you, it's been something that's very heavy on me. I think like it has been on much of the country over the past several months. I think one thing that I've really come to I've learned or processed here is that a lot of times white folks say things like, "Well, I'm not racist," right? Like, I mean, I don't use bad language towards black folks. I have a black friend, right? Like we come up with ways.
William, will you be my black friend?
Right.
We come up.
Right?
That's right. That's right. We come up with ways to say, like, well, I'm not part of the problem, right? Like,
Yes.
I haven't done anything specifically, and I think William hit into it like a lot
And
of
maybe
times.
even have some proactive things you've done, like,
Right,
hey, I'm friend,
right,
like you said, I have friends, or
right.
I've been friendly.
Exactly.
I've never
I
been
mean, I've
hateful.
never done anything, and we come, and I think William alluded to, or was just talking about how we tend to we come up with ways to kind of like make ourselves feel like, okay, well, actually, we're a good person, right? Like, we're not doing any of these things. Like, I didn't do anything wrong. Why am I getting painted with this brush, right?
Which all those things, we should say, all those things can be true in someone's experience.
Absolutely,
100%.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I could check all of those boxes for myself.
Absolutely.
And I could really easily judge other people who are doing overtly racist things and be like, well, I'm not that, right? But what I've learned, I think, over the past several months, and some of it's been through media, but very little of it's actually been through like, well, I don't watch much news, so it's not like I'm getting input from there. A lot of it's been through having actual conversations with people of color, and then just I mentioned earlier, just doing some research, like reading it and kind of trying to get other people's perspective, like you were talking about. It's not about agreeing. It's not about like, hey, look, I got this book and I read it and I agree with every single thing this author said about race in America. No. Right. It's about saying, wow, I never thought about it from this perspective. And you know what? Maybe there's more to this story, because if William can get on this conversation and you can watch him talk with emotion about what his experience is, as a follower of Christ, if I look at that and my response as a white person is to go, well, technically Trayvon Martin I'm out. Mm-hmm. That is not overtly being racist. That's not me using bad words or language or disparaging, but that is minimizing the experience and the emotion of my fellow brothers in Christ. And we have, I think so. That's what I've learned, just to slow down, to say, whoa, what was my snap reaction to this situation is, one of the things you hear all the time, they should have just complied with the police officer and none would have happened. Well, you know what? That may actually be true in that situation, but if that's a snap reaction to go, hold on, let me stop. Let me think. Let me process this. And it doesn't mean that we're anti-police for taking a break and saying, let me think about this. Let me see what William's experience is. How does he feel about this? And I think that's one of the biggest things for me, is that we've got to, I know William says, I love this, I think it's one of the most, is lean into this. So white folks have to lean into this with black folks, but this is not really the responsibility of black people, in my opinion, to solve the race problem in America, right? It really is incumbent, in my opinion, not as a police officer talking here, but just as a white follower of Christ, to lean hard into this, into the uncomfortableness of it, and to say, we have a responsibility as white brothers and sisters of Christ to reach out and hear what is being said. And oftentimes it's been said a whole lot for a long time, and our ears have been covered. And so how do we do that? And how do we work together to admit that, like, hey, we've got some problems, and it's not about adopting some platform. Like, hey, look, like I said, I've got to agree with everything that this civil rights leader says. I don't have to agree, but I have to be willing to engage and listen and learn. And it really is, I heard on a podcast I was listening to, someone made a comment. It was a black person who was a leader in the black community. And I won't say his name because I don't want to start some controversy in the comment thread on this, right? But anyway, what he said was, his request was, like, I really don't need more black people talking about race in America. I need more white folks talking to other white folks about race in America. Mm-hmm. So what I've taken from this is my responsibility is not to become anti-police, to become like extra woke, or whatever the whatever term is to say, let's try to understand each other better. Let's acknowledge the problem and the historical system that has existed, and how do we work together to fix it? And how do I, when I'm in a situation where I'm surrounded by people who had my experience and who look like me, how to be brave enough and bold enough to say, no, that's not, you can't talk like that. That's not something we should be saying, because it may not be what in your mind this most racist behavior, but by allowing that stuff to fester and build, and to allow those conversations to have with no judgment on it, no one calling it out, we're contributing to the problem. So that's my responsibility, I feel like, and I credit a lot of that to just the past, I mean, even just the past several months of just trying to really digest where we are in America today and how we got here.
And Russ, you are so right, man. That's like these last few months, you've seen people from all walks of life, man, coming together to say, hey, look, whoa, time out, guys. Like, we got to do something different. Like, enough is enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
William, you've experienced racism firsthand, and your perspective is something I can't understand, but I'm learning and understanding it as I get to know you, and then I stay in conversation with you. But I'm wondering, for you personally, what are you learning about racism right now? You know, you've been on a journey. What do you feel like as a Christ follower you're learning right now?
That it's being exposed. Like, people are, not only is it being exposed more now, but more people are willing to acknowledge it and say and call it for what it is. I think for the longest time, people were like, "Oh, that's not happening," or "not in my backyard," or "not." It's like to what Rush was saying, like, "No, I didn't do it," or "None of my friends did that." But now people are like, "Hey, look, guys, we are at a tipping point now. We have an opportunity to have some real dialogue, which can lead to some real change. And we need to do something better than what we've done in the past to make this world better for future generations." For the longest time, it was like that, the ugly little secret you kind of had tucked away over here. Now people are like, no, let's peel these layers. Let's take the sheet off and call it for what it is. And I think it's a wonderful time to be a Christ follower, because we have an opportunity to engage in those conversations, to not shy away from it. Like, if you're a Christ follower, there's no way on God's green earth that you can sit around and stand by idle while some of these things are going on.
That's good. That's good. I have, we could launch an entire, whole nother conversation about bringing the kingdom of God into every conversation. But the fact that you're having conversation is a part of the kingdom mindset as well. Rush, how do you go back to work tomorrow or tonight? How do you go back to work tonight as a Christ follower and bring the kingdom of God where you are? We pray this: His kingdom come, His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. But we're His kingdom representatives. How do you go and represent that in your job policing?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's not without its challenges. I think whenever we go into the world, no matter what profession we're in or what line of work we're doing, it's obviously very challenging to be bold and to speak about our faith. Or although I honestly, I think in a lot of ways it's easier to speak about faith than it is about race. It seems like that's a much hotter issue. But I think I'll echo again a little bit of what William said about just the opportunity that exists in my profession, amongst my coworkers, just to try to be somewhat of a beacon of light, to say that that even the most hardened criminals that we deal with have humanity, and we have to at least look at people like human beings. Doesn't mean that we ignore their crime or that they get away with, I mean, it doesn't mean we don't enforce the law, but it means that like we're treating people with human dignity. And it's easy to get jaded to that. Like it's really easy when you're dealing with like
especially
the worst.
when you're not being treated with human dignity.
Right.
And
Exactly.
in the last
Absolutely.
few months, I know with other officers
Absolutely.
I've been praying with, especially our Richmond police officers in our church, and how they've been treated. They're dehumanized in those moments.
Absolutely. And so it's not easy. And I mean, but in addition to just, coworkers, it's also trying to just anything that I can do to instill some sense of trust and hope in the community. This trust that's been broken, and it has been broken. And it doesn't, we could argue all day whether, well, it's not really fair that it's been broken. It doesn't really matter, right? I mean, it's broke. So it's going to take a long time to heal that. But anything that I can do to have small interactions with people, to have conversations, even if it's not when I'm actually out in the field at work, but if it's just with other people I know who know I'm a police officer, if they hear me speak in a certain way and address the community in a certain way, my hope is that we can start to build connections that start to rebuild that trust that's not there right now. And just understanding that, it's probably not going to get healed overnight, right? This is a massive problem, and we didn't get here overnight, and we're not going to fix this overnight.
That's right.
But that's the challenge, is trying to communicate to my coworkers who have experienced some very poor treatment recently, right?
Sure.
Right. But to communicate to them that just like a police officer who does something bad is not a reflection of all police. Being mistreated in a community of color by someone we shouldn't be painting with broad brush strokes a whole community either. That's a hard message to sell to all humans, right? But that's my hope, is just to try to be that beacon, to try to shine a light of Christ into these situations. And even if it's like William said, I keep copying his stuff, like the little ripple in a pond, like just we're trying. And if William's throwing rocks and I'm throwing little rocks and we're making ripples, then hopefully that expands. And so by the time that, our kids are running this, it'll be different. And William's kids and my kids are going to have a different experience. That's my prayer.
That's good. William, let me close with you. As a follower of Christ, how do you live out the kingdom and bring God's kingdom into your relationships and every one of your perspectives and what you're sharing and who you have influence while you're grieving yourself?
Just trusting, Shane. I mean, we've been following him for a little while. He's got this. He's got this under control. Like, our understanding of it is nowhere. We can't even begin to understand the whys and the whats and whatever, but it's trusting in things unseen. That's what our faith is all about. It's not for me to understand everything all the time when I'm trusting in his divine wisdom.
Is it encouraging to you in these conversations of what you've been having? You've been behind the scenes, you've been working in your community. Are you encouraged overall of where things are going, even despite what we see and what
absolutely,
we experience?
Absolutely. I would, absolutely. Because it's the small things. Like, I might not see, well, I wouldn't say, because that would be like no faith in humanity if I said that. It's like, I don't think I'm gonna see it in my lifetime, but I think
come on,
I'm pretty sure.
But it feels that's reality, bro. That's reality. You feel like that.
We're on the right track, man. We got to keep having these conversations, though. We got to keep having, but not just conversations, actions. Because unless there's consequences behind some of these instances, unless there's some movement in terms of like how how the laws are changed. There's so many different layers to this thing, man, as far as like the system and the system being broke, whether it be related to the police reform or whether it be related to the economic disparities or socioeconomic class type of things that separate us. Like it's so many systems that are broken right now, but God's system is the one you can rely on all the time.
Yeah, that's good. Well, you know, what I'm so encouraged in this conversation with both of you, William and Rush, to hear two men of God who are processing racism, who are processing God's kingdom, who are processing the real issues and challenges of our police force in ways that I think we could say, hey, what would Jesus do? You know, we've asked, what would Jesus do? You know, I think this is part of what he would be doing, is having these conversations and talking and sharing the good news of the gospel. And if you're watching and been listening to this conversation, you may not agree with everything Rush and William said. You may not agree with me. Probably you didn't watch it if you don't, because you've already canceled us. But stay in a conversation with God. You know, anything William says or what Rush says or what I say doesn't matter in comparison to what God would say to you. And so I would just encourage you to stay in a conversation with God. Ask God, what do you think? Maybe you're not a racist. That isn't the point, whether you're a racist or not. The point is that racism exists. Understanding God's perspective of every human being and understanding the kingdom of what it would look like for the kingdom of heaven to come and his will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So thanks for joining us. Thank you to William, Sutton, Rush, Middleton. I'll let you guys get back to your families, but I thank you from the bottom of my heart as your pastor, as your friend. Thank you for what you do. Thanks for being transparent with us today and letting us a little bit into your perspective.
Thank you for having these conversations. Hey, Rush, thank you so much for your service, man, and all of the boys in blue, ladies in blue. Appreciate everything that y'all do day in and day out. Without y'all protecting us and doing it the right way, things would be even more crazy than they are now. So for a job well done, thank you for what y'all do from the bottom of my heart.
I appreciate it, brother. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shane.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
See you.